Hey guys, tonight we step back in time to a world where the roads weren't paved, planes hadn't been dreamed of, and the faint scent of exotic spices whispered secrets along dusty, winding paths. Imagine yourself trudging through sun-baked deserts and tangled forests, clutching precious cinnamon or peppercorns that could make kings stop and listen. You probably won't survive this trek, not without a camel, a good sense of direction, and maybe a pinch of luck. But don't worry, you're safely curled up at home, and I'm here to guide you through the curious journey of the Silk Route's lost spices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fun to know who's joining this sleepy history trip. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Long before airplanes and cargo ships, there was a web of ancient trade routes weaving through Asia, connecting east and west. These trails were the arteries through which ideas, goods, and especially spices traveled. The Silk Routes, often thought of just for the luxurious silk thread, were, in fact, bustling highways of aromatic treasures. Spices like cinnamon, black pepper, cardamom, and others embarked on journeys that could last months or even years, winding from their tropical homes to distant markets hungry for their flavors. You might be picturing grand caravans of camels carrying heavy sacks of spices, their humps swaying under the desert sun. And that's not far off. These routes stretch thousands of miles, from China's heartland through Central Asia, India, Persia, and all the way to the Mediterranean coast. Alongside silk, these precious spices were among the most valuable commodities, often worth more than gold in some eras. The origin of the Silk Routes dates back to at least the 2nd century BCE, during the Han Dynasty in China. But historians still argue whether the first traders were officially merchants or merely nomads passing goods sporadically. Some say it began with adventurous diplomats seeking alliances, while others insist it was hungry traders following animal herds and river valleys. At the edges of these routes were bustling bazaars alive with color and chatter. You'd find merchants loudly proclaiming their spices' freshness, while curious locals sniffed cinnamon bark or crushed cardamom pods between fingers. The smell alone could draw crowds, a sensory invitation to a world beyond their own. One particularly quirky detail? To keep their prized cinnamon fresh, some traders reportedly wrapped it in the leaves of the cinnamon tree itself, essentially using the plant's own foliage as natural packaging. Not exactly your modern vacuum seal, but it did the trick in a pinch. As you imagine the caravan's dust settling at night, fires crackling and spices steaming in simple pots, you realize these routes were more than trade lanes. They were the veins of culture, carrying stories and tastes that shaped civilizations. So while silk dazzled with its sheen, it was the spices on these paths that awakened palates, healed bodies, and, perhaps most importantly, told the world that faraway places were just a breath of cinnamon or a pinch of peppercorn away. As you push forward from those sun-drenched desert trails, you slip deeper into the hidden world of the spice traders, the secret networks that made the Silk Routes more than just dusty highways. Imagine a shadowy web of alliances, coded messages, and clever detours that allowed these merchants to keep their prized spices moving, sometimes right under the noses of rival empires. It's like a real-life game of historical hide-and-seek, with fragrant stakes. You're not just following the scent of cinnamon anymore, you're tracking a trade system so complex that even today, historians still argue whether these routes were tightly controlled by powerful states or loosely held together by local merchant guilds. Were the traders fearless pioneers or cautious diplomats, blending business with politics? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Take the ancient city of Palmyra in modern-day Syria, for example. Sitting like a jewel on the Silk Routes, it wasn't just a place to rest weary camels, it was a bustling hub where traders exchanged goods and gossip, forging connections across continents. Palmyra's merchants knew the value of keeping secrets, from the source of their spices to the best routes through shifting desert sands. To protect their valuable cargo, traders developed ingenious tactics. One method involved disguising spices within everyday goods. Imagine sacks of flour with hidden pockets of precious peppercorns or cinnamon sticks wrapped inside bundles of ordinary herbs. Sometimes, they'd bribe local guards or negotiate safe passage with tribal leaders, smoothing the path with gifts rather than swords. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some spice traders used elaborate code words when communicating about shipments, so if letters fell into enemy hands, the true content stayed hidden. It's a bit like the ancient version of sending a text in emoji code, except these were often poetic metaphors or references to local legends. Scholars still debate the exact nature of these codes and how effective they really were. Meanwhile, caravanserais, roadside inns spread every few days along the routes, were vital to these secretive networks. These were more than just places to sleep, they served as information hubs where merchants swapped news about weather, bandits, and new trade opportunities. You can almost hear the murmured deals and clinking of spice jars as night falls, the air thick with anticipation. These inns were often protected by local rulers who saw the spice trade as a lucrative source of income and influence. Some empires even established official caravans to safeguard goods, turning the silk routes into semi-regulated highways. Yet, many traders operated independently, weaving through backroads and mountain passes that only a handful knew well. One fascinating question remains open among historians: how much did local knowledge versus imperial power shape the success of these spice journeys? It seems the answer is a dance between the two, a blend of careful politics and nimble entrepreneurship. Picture yourself at a campfire under a vast starlit sky, spices in your pack, and the soft murmurs of other travelers blending with the crackling fire. You're part of a vast network, bound by trust and the scent of distant lands, weaving the threads that connect the ancient world. As you settle deeper into this journey, your senses tingle with the faint, sweet aroma of cinnamon, a spice wrapped in as much mystery as its taste is warmth. Cinnamon's ancient roots are tangled in stories that stretch across millennia, and historians still argue whether its earliest homes were the forests of Sri Lanka or somewhere even more elusive. Imagine yourself stepping into a humid tropical forest where cinnamon trees grow wild, their bark curling like ancient scrolls. Long ago, people harvested this bark not just for food but for sacred rituals, perfumes, and even embalming. The Egyptians, for instance, prized cinnamon highly enough to use it in mummification. It's almost funny to think that this spicy bark was once considered a magical preservative, sort of like a fancy scented bandage for the dead. The Greeks and Romans, on the other hand, were fascinated by cinnamon's origin stories. They believed cinnamon came from giant birds who collected the bark to build their nests. To harvest it, daring men had to outwit these mythical birds, who supposedly guarded their nests fiercely. Whether this legend was a merchant's clever ruse to inflate prices or genuine folklore, it's a charming glimpse of how distant lands inspired imaginative tales. Trade in cinnamon was tightly guarded. Some ancient sources suggest that the true origins of cinnamon were kept secret to maintain high prices, with traders inventing stories to mask its source. This secrecy even extended to ancient China, where cinnamon was known as ru gui, and valued for its warming properties in traditional medicine. Imagine a Chinese apothecary carefully grinding cinnamon bark into powder, whispering recipes meant to warm the body during harsh winters. A quirky historical note: in medieval Europe, cinnamon was so prized that it was sometimes used to mask the smell of less than fresh food, making it a medieval version of nose blind. This might explain why cinnamon-heavy dishes are often associated with cozy, wintry comfort even if the original intent was more practical than tasty. The debates continue about how cinnamon first reached the Mediterranean world. Some scholars argue it traveled through South India and the Arabian Peninsula, while others suggest direct maritime routes from Sri Lanka's shores. Regardless, cinnamon's journey on the silk routes is a testament to how humans long ago connected through curiosity and commerce. As you imagine peeling bark under warm sunlight, consider how cinnamon's story blends fact with folklore, scent with secrecy, and history with a dash of legend. You're following a trail where spice and story are inseparable companions, much like cinnamon and sugar, an ancient duo still warming cups and hearts today. You're now drawn into the fragrant world of cardamom, a spice that whispers of royal courts and ancient remedies. Imagine the lush, tropical hills where cardamom plants thrive, their tiny green pods bursting with an aroma that's fresh, sweet, and just a bit mysterious. This isn't just any spice, it earned a special place in the palaces of kings and the cabinets of early physicians alike. Cardamom's journey along the silk routes is intertwined with tales of luxury and healing. Ancient texts reveal that in India, it was prized as a digestive aid and a breath freshener, somewhat like the medieval version of gum, but a lot more natural. In fact, Chewing cardamom pods was a ritual that mingled hygiene with social grace, a small sign of refinement. Royal courts, especially those of the Mughal emperors, held cardamom in such esteem that it often featured in elaborate feasts and perfumed drinks. You can almost picture nobles sipping on cardamom-infused teas while silk curtains flutter gently in the breeze. Some recipes even blended cardamom with honey and rosewater, a fragrant trio that must have felt like a tiny celebration with every sip. There's a quirky historical detail that might tickle your fancy. Cardamom was sometimes called the Queen of Spices, a title usually reserved for more famous cousins like cinnamon or pepper. This nickname speaks to the high regard and almost regal mystique that surrounded cardamom in certain circles, even if today it quietly lingers in chai blends and desserts. But cardamom's story isn't just about luxury, it also has a medical side. Ancient Ayurvedic and Chinese medicines used it to treat everything from digestive troubles to respiratory ailments. Imagine a healer in a bustling market stall, carefully grinding cardamom seeds while explaining its virtues to curious customers. Historians still argue whether its medicinal use spread before or after its culinary popularity, but either way, the spice found a niche that went beyond flavor. It's worth noting that cardamom's cultivation was, and still is, a labor-intensive affair. The pods must be handpicked at just the right time, making the spice relatively rare and valuable. This scarcity added to its allure, encouraging trade routes that spanned vast distances and cultures. So, as you breathe in the faint scent of cardamom, think of its journey as a delicate thread woven through royal tables, humble kitchens, and ancient apothecaries, a small green pod carrying big stories of taste, health, and elegance. As your journey continues, the unmistakable bite of black peppercorns invites you deeper into the story of a spice that truly changed the world. Picture the humid, shadowy jungles of India's Western Ghats, where black pepper vines cling to towering trees, their tiny berries swelling with potential. It's here, in these tangled forests, that black pepper first grew wild before becoming one of the most sought-after commodities in history. Black pepper's rise from a regional seasoning to a global sensation is nothing short of remarkable. It wasn't just a spice, it was a form of currency, a status symbol, and at times, even more valuable than gold. You might find it amusing that Roman emperors demanded pepper as part of their tribute. Imagine the spice as a royal gift, wrapped with pomp but transported by sweaty caravan drivers over treacherous terrain. The Romans were so obsessed with pepper that it fueled some of the earliest long-distance trade between Europe and India. Merchants risked bandits, harsh deserts, and rough seas to bring these tiny black beads to Mediterranean tables. It's fascinating to think about how a pinch of pepper could unite two worlds separated by thousands of miles. One quirky fact: black pepper was sometimes used in medieval Europe to mask the flavor of aging or poorly stored meats. While it might sound like a trick, it also led to the spice's reputation as a culinary must-have, because who wants to eat bland or spoiled food, right? The pepper trade was also deeply entwined with politics and power struggles. Historians still argue how much control the Roman Empire exerted over the spice routes and whether local Indian kingdoms maintained their own monopolies on pepper production and export. It was a tug-of-war, played out not just on maps but in market stalls and palace banquets. As you imagine the spice-laden caravans winding through mountain passes, keep in mind that black pepper's journey wasn't just about commerce, it also shaped cultures and cuisines far beyond its origin. It transformed the flavor profiles of European, Middle Eastern, and Asian dishes, sparking culinary creativity that still influences kitchens today. So, when you sprinkle black pepper on your next meal, remember the centuries of history it carries, the perilous paths, the diplomatic dealings, and the simple joy of a little spice making everything better. Now you're entering a chapter of spice history steeped in legend, myth, and fierce rivalry. Welcome to the world of nutmeg. Picture a small, verdant island or two tucked away in the Banda Sea, where nutmeg trees bloom with fragrant red fruits hiding tiny seeds that would set empires on edge. These islands were once so valuable that nations fought brutal battles for control, proving that spice could be as potent as any sword. Nutmeg's story is a fascinating blend of botanical wonder and colonial ambition. Originally native to the Moluccas, or the Spice Islands as Europeans called them, nutmeg's unique aroma and flavor were prized for cooking, medicine, and even as a supposed cure for the plague. Imagine an early modern apothecary carefully grinding nutmeg, confident it might keep the deadly disease at bay, even though historians still argue how much these remedies really helped. The 16th and 17th centuries saw fierce battles between the Dutch and Portuguese, who both recognized nutmeg's immense value. The Dutch eventually gained control, establishing a strict monopoly by forcibly relocating entire populations and destroying nutmeg trees on rival islands to maintain their grip. It's chilling and fascinating to imagine the lengths traders and rulers went to for this single spice. There's a quirky myth about nutmeg that still lingers. Sailors believed it could ward off seasickness, carrying nutmeg seeds as lucky charms on long voyages. Some even claimed that nutmeg helped them stay alert during stormy nights. Whether true or superstition, nutmeg's reputation as a magic seed grew alongside its commercial worth. Historians still debate how much nutmeg's price affected European economies and the course of colonial expansion. Some suggest it was a driving force behind global exploration, while others see it as just one part of a larger pattern of resource-driven conquest. Picture yourself standing on the shore of one of these tiny islands, the air thick with the scent of nutmeg trees, while ships laden with spice prepare to set sail for distant lands. It's a world where a humble seed dictated fortunes and fates alike. Nutmeg's legacy is complex, part botanical treasure, part symbol of imperial ambition, reminding us how something so small could change the course of history. The scent of cloves beckons you toward the tiny islands that sparked mighty conflicts, the Maluku Islands, sometimes called the Spice Islands. Here, in a lush, volcanic landscape, clove trees thrived, their flower buds holding an aroma so intense it could fill entire ships before they even set sail. The history of cloves is a story of desire, diplomacy, and daring, wrapped in the fragrant petals of this extraordinary spice. Cloves were prized not only for their taste but for their medicinal properties, used to soothe toothaches and freshen breath, among other remedies. Imagine an ancient healer grinding cloves into a paste, promising relief that was as fragrant as it was effective. The Chinese also valued cloves, reportedly using them to perfume their mouths before addressing the emperor, a small but significant detail that speaks volumes about cloves' cultural importance. Control over clove-producing islands ignited fierce competition among colonial powers. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to arrive, establishing a foothold in the early 16th century. But it was the Dutch who later enforced a strict monopoly, sometimes resorting to brutal measures, including depopulating entire islands, to control clove supply. These conflicts highlight how such a tiny spice could wield outsized influence on geopolitics. A quirky fact: clove trees only produce flower buds a few days a year, which means harvesting was a race against time and weather. This rarity added to their value and the urgency traders felt, creating tense moments in bustling markets and aboard spice ships. Historians still debate how much these monopolies affected local populations and ecosystems. Did the colonial powers' aggressive control permanently change the natural landscape, or did the islands eventually recover? The answer isn't simple, reflecting the layered impact of the spice trade. Imagine the sound of ocean waves crashing against the shores as clove-laden ships prepare for their journey, the pungent aroma lingering in the air like a promise of distant worlds. You're witnessing a world where tiny buds shaped empires, and fragrant petals carried tales of power and passion. Cloves remain a fragrant reminder of how the smallest things can have the greatest impact, their story unfolding like a delicate bloom in the history of the silk routes. As your journey winds onward, you come upon spices that once dazzled ancient kitchens but have since slipped quietly into obscurity. Imagine dusty market stalls where exotic aromas mingle, some still familiar, others nearly forgotten. These lost spices, once prized by emperors and commoners alike, hint at a world richer and more varied than the few famous names like cinnamon or pepper. Take silphium, for example, a plant so valuable to the ancient Romans that it was literally worth its weight in silver. They used it as a seasoning, a medicine, and, intriguingly, as a form of birth control. Sadly, silphium was harvested to extinction centuries ago, its exact nature still a mystery to botanists. Historians still argue whether it was a species of giant fennel or something entirely different, but its legacy remains wrapped in fragrant legend. Another forgotten flavor is grains of paradise, a peppery seed from West Africa that once flavored European dishes before being overshadowed by black pepper. Merchants carried it across the Sahara and into Mediterranean markets, where its zesty heat added a spark to medieval cuisine. Imagine medieval cooks reaching for these tiny seeds to add excitement to otherwise bland meals. You might chuckle at the story of cassia, often confused with cinnamon, which was considered a cheaper, more common alternative. Yet, in certain regions, cassia held its own special place in cooking and ritual. The fine line between cassia and cinnamon caused plenty of trade confusion, leading to what we might call the ancient spice market's version of brand rivalry. Historians also debate the extent to which these lost spices influenced culinary traditions outside their places of origin. Did silphium's extinction force cooks to invent new flavor profiles? Was grains of paradise's decline a key factor in pepper's dominance? These questions remain open, inviting you to ponder the ever-shifting palette of history. So, as you imagine wandering through an ancient bazaar, nose twitching at hints of spices no longer with us, you're reminded that history tastes richer when we savor what's been lost as much as what remains. As you drift further from Asia's lush landscapes, the silk routes unfold across vast deserts and bustling Middle Eastern cities, revealing the vital role African and Middle Eastern traders played in expanding the spice trade's reach. Picture caravans laden with fragrant goods crossing the Red Sea and threading through the Arabian Peninsula, connecting cultures in a fragrant dance of commerce and curiosity. The Arabian traders were masters of navigation and negotiation. They not only transported spices but also spices stories, tales of exotic lands and curious customs that sparked imaginations across continents. You might imagine a Bedouin merchant deftly bartering for cinnamon, cardamom, or pepper, his camel's hooves stirring desert dust beneath endless skies. Meanwhile, African traders, particularly those from the Swahili coast, acted as critical bridges between the Indian Ocean's spice-rich islands and the vast markets inland. Cities like Kilwa and Zanzibar flourished as hubs where spices mingled with gold, ivory, and textiles. It's almost poetic to picture dhow boats, their lateen sails catching the wind as they ferry cargo scented with cloves or nutmeg toward hungry buyers. Here's a quirky detail: some African traders developed their own unique spice blends, mixing imported ingredients with local herbs and roots to create flavors that were distinctly their own. These blends often served both culinary and medicinal purposes, weaving spice into everyday life beyond mere seasoning. Historians still argue about how much influence these African and Middle Eastern networks had on shaping global tastes and trade patterns. Did their role extend beyond transit hubs to cultural innovators? The evidence suggests they were more than mere middlemen. They actively contributed to the spice trade's evolution. Imagine the bustling markets where languages intertwined, spices spilled from sacks in fragrant piles, and traders exchanged not just goods but knowledge, traditions, and dreams. The silk routes were truly a tapestry woven from many hands and hearts. So as you picture those sunlit coasts and starry deserts, know that the spice trade was never a simple journey from point A to point B. It was a rich exchange that crossed oceans and continents, connecting worlds in ways still felt today. Your path now winds through stories often hidden from history books, the remarkable women whose influence on the spice trade quietly shaped the silk routes. Picture market stalls where women carefully select spices, caravans where women manage logistics, and royal courts where female patrons determine which aromas grace their tables. Their hands and decisions were vital threads in the fabric of spice commerce. Though most histories spotlight male traders and rulers, evidence suggests women played diverse roles, from merchants to mediators. For example, in certain regions like the Arabian Peninsula and parts of East Africa, women controlled spice businesses within their communities, negotiating deals and overseeing shipments. Imagine a woman trader, her fingers deftly weighing cardamom pods while keeping a keen eye on the shifting market prices. One quirky example comes from the island of Socotra, where women were known to gather and process frankincense and myrrh, valuable aromatic resins often traded alongside spices. Their knowledge of harvesting and preserving these products was passed down through generations, forming a subtle but essential part of trade networks. Historians still argue about how widespread women's involvement was and how much authority they truly wielded in this male-dominated sphere. Yet, recent scholarship increasingly highlights their agency, suggesting that women were not just participants but crucial players in sustaining trade and cultural exchange. Beyond commerce, women influenced culinary traditions, medicinal practices, and even the cultural meanings attached to spices. In households across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, women's knowledge of spice blends helped define regional cuisines and healing rituals, linking them intimately to the sensory history of the silk routes. So, as you imagine bustling markets and quiet kitchens alike, remember that the story of spices is also a story of women's hands and hearts, often unseen, yet undeniably vital to the spice-scented legacies we still enjoy today. As the spice trails weave through ancient cities and villages, you find yourself immersed in the aromatic world of medicine and ritual, where spices were more than flavor, they were healing agents and sacred symbols. Imagine stepping into an ancient apothecary, where shelves overflow with jars of powdered herbs, crushed seeds, and bark, each promising relief or blessing. Spices like cinnamon, cardamom, and cloves featured prominently in medicinal recipes across cultures. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Indians all valued these spices for their supposed health benefits. Picture a healer carefully grinding cinnamon to treat digestive ailments or blending cloves into a paste to ease toothaches, a sensory ritual that mingled scent with healing. In addition to their physical uses, spices played crucial roles in religious ceremonies and rites. Frankincense and myrrh, often traded alongside spices, were burned as offerings, filling temples with fragrant smoke meant to purify and connect the earthly with the divine. Imagine priests in flowing robes carrying censers, the sweet aroma of these resins drifting through sacred spaces. Here's a quirky detail: some cultures believed spices could ward off evil spirits or bad luck. Carrying a pouch of certain spices was thought to protect individuals from harm, making spice not only a commodity but also a talisman. Historians still argue how much of this belief was spiritual and how much was practical, such as spices' antimicrobial properties. Ancient Chinese medicine, for example, classified spices like ginger and cinnamon as warming agents, balancing the body's energies in ways that modern science is only beginning to explore. Imagine a patient reclining while a herbalist combines these warming spices with other ingredients in a steaming concoction meant to restore harmony. So, as you breathe in the lingering aromas of an ancient apothecary or a sacred temple, you realize spices were threads that connected health, spirituality, and daily life, an intricate weave that enriched the silk routes far beyond mere trade. As the spice trails stretch onward, you find yourself tasting the subtle but profound ways spices shaped global cuisine. Imagine the slow blending of flavors as traders, cooks, and everyday people across continents began mixing the familiar with the exotic, crafting new dishes that carried the echoes of distant lands. Spices like black pepper, cinnamon, and cardamom didn't just add heat or sweetness, they inspired culinary creativity. For example, the introduction of black pepper into Mediterranean cooking transformed simple recipes into complex flavor profiles that delighted palates. Picture a Roman banquet where peppercorns were sprinkled over roasted meats, surprising and pleasing guests with their fiery bite. The story of curry is a perfect example of this blending. What started as local spice blends in South Asia eventually found their way to European kitchens, evolving into countless variations that reflected local tastes. Historians still argue about the exact timeline and routes through which these blends spread, but the evidence shows a vibrant exchange that crossed oceans and cultures. A quirky note: in medieval Europe, spices were sometimes so precious that cooks would layer them heavily in dishes not just for flavor but to display wealth and sophistication, leading to what some call the spice cake effect, where the spice overwhelmed the food. This overindulgence may sound amusing now, but it speaks to spices' status as symbols of prestige. As you imagine markets from Cairo to Venice, you can almost see merchants swapping not just goods but recipes, techniques, and tastes, each encounter adding a new thread to the world's culinary tapestry. Spices facilitated not only trade but also cultural dialogue, slowly transforming what people ate and how they experienced food. So the next time you enjoy a dash of cinnamon or a sprinkle of pepper, remember it's part of a centuries-old journey, one that brought flavors from distant forests and islands to your plate, creating a shared history of taste and tradition. You've now reached a quieter, more complex part of the story: the decline of old spice monopolies as new trade routes and shifting politics reshaped the global map. Imagine bustling ports growing quieter, caravans slowing, and empires scrambling to adapt to changes that would forever alter the flow of spices. For centuries, powerful players like the Dutch East India Company held near total control over spices such as nutmeg and cloves, enforcing monopolies through strict regulations and sometimes brutal tactics. But with the age of exploration came new sea routes around Africa and later, the discovery of the Americas, which challenged these old networks. It's fascinating to picture Portuguese, Dutch, and British ships sailing farther and faster, bringing spices from unexpected places and breaking long-standing monopolies. These developments introduced competition and lowered prices, making spices more accessible but also disrupting traditional trade hubs. Historians still argue how much these new routes democratized the spice trade versus how much they simply shifted control from one empire to another. A quirky detail is that as monopolies weakened, some spices found themselves grown in new lands like nutmeg and cloves cultivated in the Caribbean or Zanzibar. This agricultural transplanting often faced ecological challenges but also marked the beginning of a truly global spice economy. The decline of monopolies also led to cultural shifts. Markets once reserved for elite merchants opened up, allowing more diverse groups to participate. This change laid groundwork for modern globalization but also created tensions and new power dynamics. Imagine the once vibrant caravans through deserts and mountains giving way to steamships and railroads trade faster but perhaps less romantic. The Silk Route's spirit lingered, but its form was forever transformed. So as you ponder these shifts, remember that the story of spices isn't just about the past's glories but about adaptation and change, echoes that still ripple through the culinary and cultural worlds today. As the old spice empires faded, their legacies lived on in subtle yet powerful ways, whispering through cultural traditions that continue to flavor life today. Picture a cozy kitchen in a distant village where recipes passed down for generations still call for a pinch of cardamom or a dash of cloves, carrying ancient stories in every bite. Across the world, the remnants of the Silk Route spice trade are woven into festivals, rituals, and everyday customs. In Morocco, for instance, the use of cinnamon and saffron in tagines speaks to centuries of exchange, while in India, the ritual preparation of masalas, spice blends, connects families to their heritage and the broader history of spice commerce. One charming detail: in some parts of the Middle East, offering guests sweetened coffee spiced with cardamom remains a symbol of hospitality and friendship, a gesture rooted in the trade's long history of connecting people. It's a small act that carries immense cultural weight, blending the past and present. Historians still debate how much these cultural practices consciously preserve the spice trade's legacy versus evolving independently, but it's clear that spices remain more than mere ingredients, they are carriers of identity and memory. Think of the arts as well. Spices have inspired poetry, music, and folklore, their scents evoking emotions and stories that transcend generations. The Silk Routes weren't just about goods, they were about ideas, emotions, and connections. So as you savor the aromas in your own kitchen or enjoy a spiced tea, you're participating in a living tradition that bridges continents and centuries, a testament to the enduring power of those ancient trails. Your journey brings you to the present day, where the ancient Silk Route spice trails quietly persist, woven into modern markets, customs, and landscapes. Picture bustling bazaars in Istanbul or spice souks in Marrakesh, where the scents of cinnamon, cumin, and coriander mingle in the air, connecting today's shoppers to centuries of history. Though the grand caravans and imperial monopolies have faded, small-scale traders and family-run stalls keep the spirit alive. You might imagine a vendor carefully weighing saffron threads or a chef selecting fresh spices for traditional dishes, unaware that their humble acts echo ancient journeys. Modern transportation and global supply chains have made spices accessible worldwide, but the cultural heart of the trade remains rooted in these historic centers. Historians still argue how much globalization has transformed local practices versus preserved age-old methods, but the balance between innovation and tradition is a delicate dance. In some regions, efforts to revive traditional spice cultivation and sustainable harvesting honor the past while adapting to present challenges. These projects often engage local communities, blending conservation with economic development, a modern tribute to the trade's enduring significance. You might smile at the thought that despite technology's reach, the essence of the Silk Routes, the exchange of culture, flavor, and connection, remains vibrant. The lost spices may have faded, but their stories and scents continue to whisper through markets and kitchens worldwide. So as you reflect on this journey, from tropical forests to desert caravans and bustling bazaars, You realize that the Silk Route spice trails are not just relics of history but living pathways that still enrich our world today. As you journey further into the world of spices, consider how the rise of European colonial powers reshaped the trade in profound ways. Picture the ambitious explorers of the 15th and 16th centuries setting sail into unknown waters, driven largely by the lure of spices that promised wealth and influence. Their voyages were more than adventures, they were calculated moves in a global game of power. Portugal and Spain led the charge, establishing sea routes around Africa and across the Atlantic to tap directly into the sources of coveted spices. The Portuguese famously rounded the Cape of Good Hope, reaching India and securing footholds that threatened existing Silk Route networks. Imagine the bustling ports of Goa and Malacca, alive with new faces, languages, and rival ambitions. The arrival of Europeans disrupted centuries-old trade systems, often violently. Established Muslim and Asian merchants found their dominance challenged by fleets armed with cannons and driven by mercantilist policies. It's almost ironic how the peaceful aroma of spices was entangled with gunpowder and colonial rivalry. Here's a quirky detail: European powers sometimes went to absurd lengths to protect their spice monopolies, including sabotaging rival plantations or staging secretive nutmeg wars to control production. Historians still debate the true scale and impact of these covert conflicts, but their echoes linger in spice lore. The colonial era also introduced new players and spices into the mix. The Caribbean became a hotspot for nutmeg and cloves, while South America contributed chilies, forever changing global flavor palettes. This blending of new and old world spices marked a turning point in culinary history. As you imagine caravels cutting through ocean waves, laden with barrels of spices destined for European markets, think about how this chapter redefined the Silk Routes not as static paths, but dynamic arenas of cultural collision and exchange. This phase of spice history reminds us that the quest for flavor often drives humanity into uncharted and transformative territories. Following the upheaval of early colonial spice wars, you find yourself amidst the rise of global spice markets, places where traders from all corners of the world gathered to barter, bargain, and build new networks. Imagine the lively marketplaces of Venice, Amsterdam, and London, echoing with voices speaking dozens of languages, where spices were weighed, tasted, and traded like precious jewels. Venice, in particular, became a vital gateway between East and West. Its merchants held considerable sway over the European spice trade, controlling access to goods brought overland or by sea. Picture gondolas gliding through canals lined with warehouses packed with cinnamon, pepper, and nutmeg, these spices fueling not only commerce but also the city's wealth and cultural flourishing. Yet, these markets were far from peaceful bazaars. Rivalries between merchant families and nations often played out in legal disputes, covert smuggling, and elaborate schemes to maintain exclusivity. A quirky story tells of Venetian traders using false labels and secret blends to trick competitors, a kind of early spice branding that kept customers and rivals guessing. Historians still debate the extent to which these European spice hubs shaped global economic systems. Were they mere recipients of Asian wealth, or active players in reshaping trade routes and market dynamics? The evidence points to a bit of both, highlighting the complexity of early global capitalism. Beyond commerce, these markets became melting pots of culture and innovation. Spices inspired not only recipes but also art, fashion, and even medicine, as knowledge from diverse regions mixed and evolved. Imagine yourself wandering a crowded spice market, the air thick with scent and possibility, where every transaction carries the weight of distant lands and long histories. It's a vivid reminder that the Silk Route's legacy extended far beyond dusty caravan trails, into the vibrant heart of global exchange. As the centuries unfold, spices continue to influence not only economies and cuisines but also social customs and rituals across the world. Picture grand European banquets where piles of peppered meats and cinnamon-scented pastries showcased the host's wealth and global connections. These lavish displays were as much about status as flavor, a language of power spoken through spice. In many cultures, spices also found their way into celebrations and ceremonies. In India, for example, the fragrant smell of cardamom and saffron fills weddings and festivals, symbolizing prosperity and joy. Imagine the delicate aroma wafting through crowded streets, mingling with music and laughter, creating an atmosphere charged with meaning. A quirky tidbit. In Renaissance Europe, spice boxes were sometimes given as gifts during special occasions, treasured like jewelry boxes. These containers, often ornately decorated, reflected the preciousness of their contents and the esteem in which spices were held. The idea of gifting a spice box might seem odd today, but back then, it was a thoughtful and prestigious gesture. Historians still argue about how much the demand for spices influenced cultural practices versus how much existing traditions simply embraced these new flavors. It's likely a fascinating mix of adaptation and innovation. Spices also played a role in social etiquette. For example, in some Middle Eastern cultures, offering guests spiced coffee or tea was a sign of respect and welcome, a ritual that continues in many households today. As you imagine these vibrant scenes, banquets, festivals, and quiet homes, you see spices as more than ingredients. They are storytellers, symbols, and connectors, weaving threads of culture, identity, and history into the fabric of everyday life. So, the next time you enjoy a festive meal or a warm cup of spiced tea, you're tasting centuries of tradition, a sensory bridge from the Silk Routes to your own table. Moving forward in time, your journey leads you to the fascinating intersection of spices and science, where curiosity and experimentation transformed ancient trade goods into subjects of study. Imagine early modern laboratories filled with glass vials, fragrant powders, and alchemical texts, as scholars sought to unlock the secrets of spices beyond their culinary uses. The Renaissance era saw a surge of interest in the properties of spices, inspired by the influx of new materials from the Silk Routes and colonial expeditions. Think of figures like Paracelsus, who championed the use of spices such as cinnamon and cloves in medicinal concoctions, blending tradition with emerging scientific inquiry. One quirky fact: some early scientists believed that spices contained fiery essences that could balance the body's humors, a concept that combined mystical ideas with empirical observation. These theories influenced treatments for everything from digestion to mood, long before the advent of modern medicine. Historians still debate how much these early scientific approaches advanced understanding versus reinforcing misconceptions. Nevertheless, the dialogue between science and spice opened pathways for pharmacology and botany, encouraging botanical gardens and spice cultivation experiments in Europe. Spices also inspired exploration in chemistry and trade botany. For instance, the quest to cultivate cloves and nutmeg outside their native islands was not just economic but botanical, involving trials to adapt plants to new soils and climates. These efforts sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed, but always reflected human ingenuity. Imagine a scholar carefully examining spice samples under candlelight, jotting notes that would influence generations to come. The Silk Routes, once pathways of commerce, became conduits of knowledge and discovery. So, as you sip a warm drink spiced with cinnamon or ginger, you're not just tasting history but the spark of scientific curiosity that centuries ago sought to understand the magic within these ancient aromas. Your journey now moves into the artistic realm, where spices have inspired painters, poets, and storytellers across centuries. Picture the grand halls of Renaissance Europe, adorned with paintings depicting exotic spice merchants, lush markets, and sumptuous feasts, each canvas capturing the allure and mystery of these fragrant treasures. Spices were more than commodities, they were symbols of wealth, adventure, and even sensuality. For example, in Dutch Golden Age paintings, baskets overflowing with spices like nutmeg, cloves, and pepper often signaled the prosperity brought by global trade. Imagine an artist painstakingly layering oils to capture the shimmering cinnamon bark or glossy black peppercorns, inviting viewers into a world both real and fantastical. Poetry, too, drew on spice imagery. In Persian and Arabic literature, spices were metaphors for love, longing, and divine fragrance, rich scents evoking emotion and spirituality. These poetic traditions transformed spices into symbols that transcended their physical uses, connecting the sensory with the sublime. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Renaissance cooks doubled as poets, composing verses celebrating spices alongside their recipes. The blending of culinary art and literature highlights the cultural importance spices held beyond mere taste. Historians still debate the extent to which spice symbolism influenced European art and literature versus reflecting existing cultural values. Either way, spices remain a vivid motif, a sensory shorthand for opulence and exoticism. Imagine yourself wandering a gallery or reading ancient verses, feeling the evocative power of spices to conjure worlds of beauty, desire, and history. So, when you savor the scent of a spice blend, you're also engaging with centuries of artistic expression, a fragrant thread weaving through human creativity and culture. As you continue your spice-scented journey, it's time to explore how these treasured commodities shape the very geography of the world. Picture cartographers in shadowy rooms, their hands tracing coastlines and trade routes, trying to map the vast networks where spices traveled, routes that would redefine borders and inspire exploration. The demand for spices like cinnamon, cloves, and pepper spurred European powers to seek new passages to Asia, igniting the age of discovery. Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan sailed vast oceans, motivated in large part by the desire to control spice trade routes. Imagine the thrill and peril as their ships ventured into uncharted waters, all in pursuit of a pinch of flavor. Spices also influenced the founding of new colonies and trading posts. Strategic ports like Goa, Malacca, and Macau became bustling hubs where East met West, cultures blended, and global commerce thrived. These locations, often established to secure spice supplies, grew into important cities with lasting legacies. Here's a quirky fact: early maps sometimes featured fantastical creatures or exaggerated spice-producing regions, reflecting both genuine mystery and wishful thinking. Historians still debate how much these cartographic embellishments affected navigation and perception of the world. The geography of spices thus became intertwined with political power, navigation, and cultural exchange. These routes helped shape not only trade but also language, religion, and social structures in regions far from the original spice sources. As you imagine ancient maps illuminated by candlelight, you realize that the spice trade was as much a journey of discovery, geographical, cultural, and human, as it was of flavor. So, each time you sprinkle pepper or grind cinnamon, remember the vast seas and unknown lands that shaped the journey of these spices, forever mapping our shared history. Continuing your journey, you encounter the fascinating story of spice routes' impact on language and communication. Imagine the bustling bazaars and ports where traders from diverse cultures met, speaking different tongues but united by the language of commerce, often expressed through shared terms for spices and trade goods. Many spice-related words in European languages have roots in Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, and Malay, reflecting centuries of interaction. For instance, the word cinnamon traces back to the Hebrew cinnamon, which itself may have earlier origins. Pepper comes from the Sanskrit pipali, showing how these terms traveled alongside the spices themselves. A quirky detail: some spice names morphed amusingly over time. Ginger, for example, evolved from the Sanskrit sringavram, becoming gingerbread in Old French before reaching English. These linguistic shifts reveal not just trade but cultural adaptation and exchange. Historians and linguists still debate which routes had the most influence on spreading these terms and how the movement of spices accelerated language change. The Silk routes were not just physical paths but also channels for words and ideas. In addition to vocabulary, merchants developed pidgin languages and trade jargons to bridge gaps, some of which evolved into Creole languages still spoken today in port cities and former colonies. Imagine traders haggling over the price of cloves using a blend of tongues, gestures, and shared jargon, a vibrant linguistic tapestry woven by spice trade. This linguistic legacy highlights how spices connected people far beyond markets and ships. They shaped how cultures communicated and understood each other, laying foundations for globalization long before the term existed. So, when you speak about pepper or cinnamon, you're echoing voices from distant lands and ancient conversations, a reminder of the rich human connections sparked by the humble spice. Your path now winds toward the spiritual dimension of the spice trade, a realm where fragrances carried profound symbolic meanings across cultures. Imagine temples, churches, and mosques where incense and spices were integral to worship, cleansing, and ritual, filling sacred spaces with scent and significance. Frankincense and myrrh, often traded alongside culinary spices, were especially prized for their role in religious ceremonies. Picture priests waving censers, sending clouds of aromatic smoke rising to the heavens, a sensory bridge between the earthly and divine. These rituals created an immersive atmosphere that engaged worshippers' senses and spirits alike. In Hindu and Buddhist traditions, spices and aromatic herbs played vital roles in purification and offerings. Imagine devotees laying fragrant garlands or sprinkling spice-infused waters, acts believed to attract blessings and ward off negative forces. Historians still debate how much these practices influenced trade demand versus how trade shaped ritual use. A quirky note: some ancient texts describe spices as gifts from the gods, linking their origins to divine or mythical stories that enhanced their allure. This spiritual branding made spices priceless beyond their material value. These sacred uses also influenced artistic and literary expressions, where spice fragrances symbolized purity, wealth, or transcendence. Imagine poets describing the perfume of paradise, weaving spice into metaphors of spiritual longing. The spiritual dimension of spices shows how deeply they penetrated human experience, bridging commerce, culture, and faith. Their scent became a language of devotion, memory, and identity. So, as you breathe in the aroma of incense or spiced candles, you're participating in a millennia-old tradition, one that connects the material and the mystical through the humble spice. Your journey now brings you to the innovative side of the spice trade, the technologies and methods that helped preserve, transport, and process these precious goods. Imagine medieval workshops where skilled artisans developed clever packaging and storage techniques to keep spices fresh during long journeys across deserts, mountains, and seas. One common method was wrapping spices in leaves or cloth, often infused with aromatic herbs themselves to prevent spoilage. Picture traders carefully bundling cinnamon bark in fragrant leaves or sealing peppercorns in tightly woven baskets. These simple yet effective techniques were crucial in an age without refrigeration. Ships carrying spices were equipped with specialized holds to protect cargo from moisture and pests, sometimes lined with salt or charcoal. Some spice caravans also employed guarded escorts and secret routes to avoid bandits, emphasizing how technology and strategy went hand in hand. A quirky historical tidbit: in some places, spices were preserved using animal fats, creating a protective coating, an early form of preservation that might sound odd today but was surprisingly effective. Historians still debate how widespread and successful these methods were, but evidence points to a variety of ingenious solutions. The processing of spices also involved labor-intensive steps, such as peeling, drying, and grinding. These tasks were often done by specialized workers who held valuable knowledge passed down through generations. Imagine bustling ports and workshops filled with the scent of drying spices, the rhythmic sound of grinding stones, and merchants inspecting the quality of their precious goods. These technological and artisanal innovations were as vital to the trade's success as the routes themselves. So, as you sprinkle ground cinnamon or pepper, remember the generations of hands and clever minds that preserved and prepared these spices for your enjoyment. As your journey through the history of spices continues, you enter the fascinating realm of culinary fusion, how spices from the silk roots blended with local ingredients to create entirely new food traditions. Imagine kitchens where cooks experiment, combining familiar flavors with exotic spices, crafting dishes that become hallmarks of regional identities. Take the spice-infused biryanis of South Asia, for example. This layered rice dish melds fragrant cardamom, cloves, and cinnamon with local meats and vegetables, creating a rich tapestry of flavors. Biryani's evolution reflects centuries of cultural exchange, influenced by Persian, Indian, and Central Asian cuisines. Similarly, the spicy stews of North Africa, like Moroccan tagines, combine native herbs with imported cinnamon and saffron, producing dishes both comforting and complex. Picture a pot simmering slowly, filled with tender meats and vegetables, the aroma inviting family and friends to gather around. A quirky fact: the Indonesian sambal fiery chili pastes blend native peppers with spices introduced through trade, showcasing how global ingredients adapt to local tastes. Historians still debate how much these fusion dishes shaped regional identities versus how much they evolved naturally from available resources. These culinary creations are living testaments to the Silk Routes' legacy, illustrating how spices transcended borders, inspiring innovation and adaptation. As you imagine chefs past and present experimenting with spice blends, you see the dynamic nature of food culture, a constant dialogue between tradition and creativity, fueled by the journeys of spices. So, when you savor a spicy curry or aromatic stew, remember you're tasting history itself, a delicious story of connection, transformation, and shared human experience. Continuing your voyage, you find yourself amidst the fascinating relationship between spices and health, how these fragrant ingredients were integral to ancient and traditional medicine worldwide. Picture bustling marketplaces where apothecaries display jars filled with colorful powders, roots, and seeds, each believed to possess healing powers. Spices like turmeric, ginger, and black pepper have been valued for their anti-inflammatory and digestive properties for thousands of years. In Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine, these spices are part of complex remedies aimed at balancing the body's energies and promoting wellness. Imagine a healer blending these spices into a soothing tea or paste, offering relief to weary travelers. A quirky note: in medieval Europe, nutmeg was sometimes thought to improve memory and mental clarity, leading scholars to carry it as a talisman during exams. While modern science questions these claims, such beliefs highlight how deeply intertwined spices were with health and well-being. Historians still debate the extent to which these medicinal uses drove demand versus their culinary appeal. Either way, the intersection of flavor and health ensured spices held a special place in daily life. As you sip your next cup of spiced tea or sprinkle cinnamon on your breakfast, consider the centuries of tradition that valued these aromas not just for taste but for healing, reminding us that the silk roots connected bodies and minds as much as markets. As your journey unfolds, you step into the fascinating world of spice symbolism and etiquette, how these fragrant treasures shaped social interactions, manners, and status across cultures. Picture grand dining halls and modest homes alike, where offering spices was both a gesture of hospitality and a display of refinement. In many societies, presenting guests with spiced dishes or beverages symbolized respect and generosity. Imagine the delicate ritual of serving cardamom-flavored coffee in Middle Eastern homes, the aroma signaling warmth and welcome. In Europe, the ability to afford costly spices like saffron or pepper often marked social standing, making them culinary badges of honor. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some Renaissance courts, spice-laden dishes were so extravagant they became conversation pieces, inspiring poetic compliments and playful rivalries among guests. Historians still debate how much these displays were genuine appreciation versus performative extravagance. The etiquette surrounding spices extended beyond food. In some Asian cultures, the use of spice-infused perfumes and incense carried social and spiritual meanings, influencing interactions and ceremonies. Understanding these customs offers a window into how deeply spices permeated not just diets but the very fabric of social life, acting as sensory cues and cultural signifiers. So, as you savor your next spiced meal or fragrant drink, remember you're participating in a rich tradition of connection, respect, and shared experience that spices have nurtured for centuries. Your journey now takes you to the fascinating relationship between spices and the environment, how cultivation, harvesting, and trade impacted ecosystems across continents. Picture dense tropical forests where cinnamon, cardamom, and nutmeg trees grow, their roots tangled with both opportunity and vulnerability. The high demand for spices often led to overharvesting and deforestation, altering landscapes and sometimes endangering plant species. For example, historians still argue whether ancient silphium's extinction was due to overuse or environmental changes, a reminder of how human appetites shape nature. The introduction of spice plantations in colonial territories further transformed ecosystems. Large-scale cultivation required clearing land, altering water systems, and sometimes displacing local communities. Some regions struggled with soil depletion and pest outbreaks, illustrating the ecological cost of the global spice trade. On a brighter note, traditional harvesting methods often emphasized sustainability, with local knowledge guiding respectful plant use. Indigenous farmers and harvesters developed techniques to preserve tree health and ensure ongoing yields, wisdom that modern conservationists now seek to understand and apply. Here's a quirky fact: some spice plants, like black pepper vines, are naturally supported by larger trees, creating mini ecosystems where agriculture and forest coexist. This symbiosis reflects nature's resilience and complexity. As you imagine lush forests and cultivated groves, you recognize the dual legacy of the spice trade, both enriching human culture and challenging ecological balance. So, the next time you enjoy a sprinkle of your favorite spice, Take a moment to appreciate the delicate environment that nurtured it and the ongoing efforts to protect these natural treasures. Your journey now brings you to the rich stories of cultural exchange sparked by the spice trade, how spices served as bridges between diverse peoples and traditions. Imagine bustling port cities where traders from Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East mingled, sharing not only goods but languages, beliefs, and customs. Spices often became symbols of cultural fusion. For example, in places like Zanzibar and Malacca, culinary traditions blended indigenous ingredients with spices brought by merchants, creating unique dishes that tell tales of connection. Imagine a street vendor serving food flavored with cloves and cardamom, where each bite reflects centuries of cultural dialogue. Beyond cuisine, spices influenced art, music, and fashion. Textiles dyed with turmeric or perfumed with sandalwood became treasured commodities, while songs and stories celebrated the allure of exotic spices and the journeys they inspired. A quirky detail: some communities developed spice-inspired festivals, celebrating harvests or trade milestones with dances, rituals, and special dishes. These festivities reinforced communal identities linked to the spice trade's legacy. Historians still debate how much the spice trade fostered peaceful cultural exchange versus fueling competition and conflict. Yet, it's clear that spices played a vital role in weaving together the world's diverse tapestries. As you imagine these vibrant interactions, you see spices not just as flavors but as ambassadors carrying stories, traditions, and connections across continents and generations. So, when you savor a spice-infused meal, remember you're tasting history's mingling of peoples and cultures, a delicious testament to humanity's shared journey. As your extended journey nears a gentle pause, you step into the world of modern rediscovery, the ways contemporary chefs, historians, and enthusiasts revive and reinterpret the lost spices and ancient trade stories. Imagine kitchens where forgotten flavors are unearthed, recipes reconstructed, and the sensory magic of the silk roots brought back to life. Across the globe, culinary historians dig into old manuscripts, piecing together spice blends once lost to time. From Ethiopian Berber to Indonesian Rempah, these blends tell tales of contact and change, preserving cultural memory in every pinch. Picture a chef carefully grinding rare spices, reconnecting diners with centuries-old traditions. There's also a growing movement towards sustainable and ethical spice sourcing, honoring the ancient lands and communities where these treasures originated. Smallholder farmers, cooperative projects, and fair trade initiatives aim to balance economic needs with environmental stewardship efforts that echo the Silk Routes blend of commerce and respect. A quirky modern twist is the fusion of ancient spices with contemporary tastes. Think spice-infused cocktails or gourmet desserts that highlight forgotten flavors. Historians and chefs still debate how best to balance authenticity with innovation, but the excitement is palpable. As you imagine the aroma of rare spices mingling with modern creativity, you realize that the Silk Routes legacy is far from static. It lives on, evolving and inspiring, a fragrant thread linking past and present. So, as you savor the spice in your kitchen tonight, you participate in a timeless journey, one where history, culture, and flavor continue to dance together in an endless, delicious story. As you move deeper into the story, consider the fascinating role spices played in diplomacy and gift-giving across cultures. Imagine grand courts where ambassadors exchanged not only letters and promises but carefully chosen spices, fragrant tokens of goodwill and power. In many civilizations, gifting spices was a strategic act. Presenting rare cinnamon sticks or jars of saffron signaled respect, forged alliances, or even sealed treaties. Picture a Persian envoy arriving with a delicately wrapped package of cloves, its scent filling the royal chambers and conveying messages beyond words. A quirky detail: some diplomatic gifts included elaborate spice blends, crafted to showcase both wealth and cultural sophistication. Historians still debate how much these fragrant offerings influenced political outcomes, but their symbolic value is undeniable. Spices also featured in coronation ceremonies and religious rites, where their aromatic presence reinforced authority and sacredness. Imagine the head of state crowned amid clouds of incense and spice-infused perfumes, a sensory assertion of legitimacy. These practices highlight spices as more than commodities. They were integral to the rituals of power and diplomacy, weaving through the political fabric of societies. So, as you imagine these scented exchanges, recognize the subtle yet profound ways spices shaped human relations, diplomacy, and the art of connection. Your journey now leads you to the fascinating story of spices in maritime navigation and ship life. Picture the bustling ports where sailors loaded their vessels not only with spices for trade but also with these aromatic treasures for daily use during long voyages. Spices like cloves and cinnamon were valued aboard ships for their preservative properties, helping to keep food fresh in the cramped, damp conditions of seafaring life. Imagine sailors chewing on peppercorns or cardamom pods to stave off seasickness and bad breath, a practical and fragrant remedy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ships even carried spice-infused oils and balms believed to protect against scurvy and other ailments. While not all these remedies were effective, they reveal the sailors' resourcefulness and hope. Historians still debate how much spices contributed to the health and morale of crews, but their presence on ships underscores their importance beyond the markets. Navigators also relied on knowledge shared along spice routes, including understanding monsoon winds and ocean currents, which were crucial for timing voyages. The exchange of this navigational wisdom among diverse cultures helped open new trade paths and connected distant shores. Imagine the salty air mingled with the scent of pepper and cinnamon, as ships sailed toward new horizons, carrying not only goods but knowledge, culture, and human ambition. So, next time you think of the spice trade, remember the sailors whose daily lives intertwined with these fragrant treasures, shaping the course of history on the high seas. The journey now takes you into the world of spice economics, how these precious commodities influenced markets, currencies, and trade policies over centuries. Picture bustling exchanges where the price of pepper or cinnamon could fluctuate wildly based on harvests, political shifts, or even rumors. Spices were often so valuable they functioned almost like currency themselves. In medieval Europe, black pepper was sometimes used to pay rent or wages, reflecting its immense worth. Imagine a farmer handing over a pouch of peppercorns to settle debt, spices as a medium of exchange beyond mere seasoning. A quirky fact: in some places, spices were stored in treasuries alongside gold and jewels, symbolizing their status as economic assets. Historians still debate how this practice affected monetary systems and wealth distribution. The control of spice markets led to the creation of powerful trading companies like the Dutch East India Company, which wielded influence rivaling that of governments. These companies established monopolies, influenced politics, and even maintained private armies to protect their interests. Market speculation around spices could trigger financial booms and busts, showing early examples of commodity trading's complexities. The volatility of spice prices often had ripple effects on entire economies, shaping trade policies and diplomatic relations. Imagine traders nervously watching market prices, negotiating deals that could make or break fortunes, all centered on tiny seeds and bark. This economic drama reveals the high stakes behind the fragrant allure of spices. So, as you sprinkle pepper on your meal, consider the centuries of economic intrigue and ambition intertwined with this simple act. Your voyage now brings you into the fascinating world of spice myths and folklore, the stories people told to explain, celebrate, or mystify these precious aromatic treasures. Imagine fireside gatherings where elders spun tales of spices as magical gifts from gods or enchanted forests guarded by mythical creatures. For example, in some cultures, cinnamon was believed to be the bark of a sacred tree protected by winged serpents, making its harvest a perilous and mystical endeavor. Imagine brave harvesters tiptoeing past these guardians, blending reality with legend. A quirky tale tells of peppercorns growing on vines guarded by dragons, with only the bravest able to collect the precious spice. These stories, while fanciful, reflect the awe spices inspired and the high value placed on them. Historians still debate how much such myths affected the spice trade. Did they deter overharvesting or simply serve as marketing tools to justify high prices? Either way, these narratives enriched the cultural fabric surrounding spices. Folklore also linked spices to health and luck, with some communities believing carrying a pinch of certain spices could ward off evil or bring prosperity. These beliefs show how deeply spices permeated daily life and spiritual practice. As you imagine these ancient stories, you realize that spices were more than flavors, they were symbols loaded with meaning, mystery, and magic. So next time you smell cinnamon or cloves, Think of the rich tapestry of myths that once surrounded these tiny treasures, connecting human imagination and history in a fragrant embrace. As your journey unfolds, you find yourself tracing the impact of spices on the arts of perfumery and cosmetics. Imagine fragrant workshops where artisans skillfully extracted essential oils from cinnamon, cloves, and sandalwood, crafting perfumes that captivated royal courts and common folk alike. Spices played a pivotal role in early perfume making. In ancient Egypt and the Mediterranean, aromatic oils infused with spices were used not only to scent the body but also for spiritual cleansing and embalming. Picture an artisan carefully blending fragrant resins and spice extracts to create scents that lingered long after the wearer had passed. A quirky historical note: some spice-infused cosmetics were believed to have aphrodisiac properties or to enhance beauty, leading to their popularity in elite circles. Historians still argue how much these beliefs influence trade demand versus actual use. The Silk Routes facilitated the exchange of perfumery techniques and ingredients across continents, fostering innovation and cultural exchange. For instance, Indian sandalwood combined with Middle Eastern spices created unique fragrances cherished across regions. Imagine walking through a fragrant market where bottles of spiced oils glisten in the sun, their scents weaving stories of trade, artistry, and human desire. So, when you catch a whiff of cinnamon or clove in a perfume or scented candle, remember the centuries of craftsmanship and cultural interplay behind that simple pleasure. As your fragrant journey continues, turn now to the fascinating influence of spices on literature and storytelling throughout history. Imagine poets and writers drawing inspiration from the exotic allure of cinnamon, pepper, and nutmeg, weaving these scents into tales of adventure, romance, and mystery. In the medieval and Renaissance periods, spices often symbolized luxury and faraway lands. Think of travelers' accounts and romances where the mention of spices evoked wealth, danger, and desire. For instance, Marco Polo's descriptions of pepper markets captivated European imaginations, inspiring countless stories and fantasies. A quirky detail: some early writers personified spices as characters or spirits, attributing them with magical qualities that shaped plot lines and allegories. Historians still debate how much these literary uses influenced popular perceptions versus reflecting existing cultural values. Spices also appeared in fables and folk tales, symbolizing transformation, temptation, or healing. These stories helped embed spices in the collective consciousness, making them more than mere commodities. Imagine sitting by a fire, hearing tales where the scent of spices signals a journey or a secret, engaging both the senses and the imagination. So, when you read about distant lands or taste a spicy dish, you're partaking in a tradition where spices stir not only palates but also the creative spirit. As your journey continues through time and scent, you now arrive at the complex relationship between spices and class, the way these prized ingredients shaped social distinctions and lifestyles. Picture opulent feasts in candlelit halls where only the elite could afford saffron-infused sauces or sweetened dishes laced with nutmeg and mace. For centuries, spices were clear markers of wealth. In medieval Europe, the ability to flavor meals with imported seasonings was a display of status. Imagine noble households measuring cinnamon like gold dust, storing it in locked spice chests carved from ivory and hardwood. A quirky historical fact: in some cities, sumptuary laws restricted spice use among the lower classes, reserving certain blends for nobility. These regulations reflected the idea that spices weren't just food, they were power, prestige, and identity. Historians still debate how effectively these laws were enforced or obeyed. Smuggling, bribery, and imitation spices all thrived under such restrictions, blurring the culinary lines between classes. Meanwhile, in other regions like parts of Asia and the Middle East, spices were more evenly woven into daily life, used by rich and poor alike in varying quantities. This contrast shows how differently cultures incorporated these treasured ingredients. Imagine the envy or admiration stirred by a heavily spiced dish at a wedding or celebration, its scent alone announcing a family's fortune or ambition. So next time you see a tiny jar of spice on a grocery shelf, remember that its presence once signaled privilege, shaped laws, and sparked dreams in kitchens grand and humble across the ancient world. Your journey now leads you to the quiet but crucial world of spice preservation and domestic storage, how families, cooks, and merchants kept these precious ingredients safe, fragrant, and potent over time. Picture kitchens and storerooms where the scent of dried herbs and warm spices lingered in the air, every container carefully chosen and every spice guarded like treasure. Before refrigeration or airtight packaging, preserving spices required ingenuity. Clay jars, glass vials, and carved wooden boxes were commonly used, often sealed with wax or fabric to protect the contents from moisture and pests. Imagine someone tucking away a small pouch of clove-studded fabric in a dry, cool corner of the home, trusting it to last the winter. A quirky preservation trick? In some cultures, peppercorns were stored in dried gourds or animal horns, and whole nutmeg was sometimes coated in lime to preserve its oils. These earthy methods helped stretch a single harvest across seasons or long journeys. Historians still debate which cultures first developed these techniques and how much knowledge was shared along trade routes versus discovered independently. Domestically, spice storage reflected both necessity and pride. In wealthier households, ornate spice cabinets were not just practical but decorative status symbols with secret drawers and compartments. Meanwhile, humbler homes often hung spice bundles from ceiling beams, allowing air to circulate and deterring rodents or insects. These quiet rituals, checking for mold, crushing fresh batches, mixing homegrown herbs with imported spices, were acts of preservation that also nurtured memory, identity, and care. So, next time you reach for that jar in your kitchen, think of the generations before you who preserved spices with patience and reverence, ensuring that flavor, warmth, and history could be passed lovingly from hand to hand. As you wander further down the spice-scented path, you arrive at the crossroads of religion and regulation, how various faiths and legal systems sought to govern the use, sale, and even spiritual meanings of spices. Picture priests, scribes, and scholars debating not just theology, but whether a particular spice was pure, permissible, or even sacred. In many religions, spices played ceremonial roles. Judaism, for instance, uses fragrant spices in the Havdalah ritual to mark the end of the Sabbath, a sensory farewell to sacred time. In Christianity, frankincense and myrrh appear not only in biblical narratives but also in incense rituals, symbolizing prayer rising toward the heavens. Islamic texts too refer to spices with reverence, both as gifts from Allah and as blessings for the body. Imagine markets in Cairo or Damascus where merchants recite verses as they sell spice blends, honoring their role as both sustenance and spiritual substance. A quirky detail: in some medieval Christian communities, certain spices were only allowed during holy seasons or in specific dishes, creating culinary calendars shaped by doctrine. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were meant to maintain piety, control trade, or simply ensure equitable distribution. Legal systems also stepped in. Some cities established spice guilds or required licenses to trade in high-value goods like saffron or cardamom. These regulations weren't just about economics, they were tied to morality, health, and community trust. Imagine scribes drafting rules in ornate script while priests debated the purity of imported cinnamon, their discussions perfumed by the very substance in question. So, as you light a spiced candle or enjoy a festive meal, know that spices have long danced between the sacred and the civic, governed by hands seeking order, meaning, and just the right amount of flavor. Now, as your journey crests another hill, you step into the world of seasonal rhythms, the way spice cultivation and trade were dictated by nature's clock. Picture farmers watching the skies and feeling the soil, timing each harvest with the precision of ritual, their hands guided by centuries of inherited wisdom. Spices like saffron had famously narrow harvest windows, just a few days when the crocus flowers bloomed and had to be plucked at dawn before the petals wilted. Imagine fields painted purple under a rising sun, as workers move swiftly, quietly, each blossom gathered with reverent care. Cloves and nutmeg, too, followed the seasons, their trees offering harvests that had to be timed with rains, winds, and drying patterns. The spice trade wasn't a steady stream, it was a pulse, rising and falling with the monsoons, the tides, and the flowering of trees half a world away. A quirky custom: in some regions, the arrival of the spice harvest was celebrated with songs or chants, blending agricultural labor with cultural expression. Historians still debate whether these seasonal festivals were purely practical or if they reflected deeper spiritual gratitude to nature. Traders timed their voyages around these cycles, sometimes waiting months at port cities for the right wind to carry them home. These delays gave rise to entire subcultures of port towns, where waiting became its own kind of trade of gossip, recipes, and blended communities. As you imagine these seasonal ebbs and flows, you begin to hear the heartbeat of the spice trade, not constant, but rhythmic. A world in step with the land, the sea, and the scent of time passing through fields and markets. So the next time you taste a spice-laced dish in a particular season, know it echoes a much older rhythm, one that once ruled oceans, lives, and longing. Your journey now turns toward the architecture of the spice trade, the physical spaces that held, protected, and enabled this fragrant commerce to flourish. Imagine massive spice warehouses lining the harbors of Lisbon, Alexandria, Calicut, and Surabaya, their thick walls trapping the scent of centuries in their beams and stonework. These were not just storage sites, they were symbols of wealth, power, and global reach. Many were fortified, with guards and gates, as spices like saffron or pepper could be worth more per ounce than gold. Picture workers rolling barrels down wooden planks, clerks scratching records with ink-stained fingers, the air heady with nutmeg and ambition. Some warehouses had elaborate ventilation systems designed to keep spices dry and fragrant. Others were sunken, half underground, to maintain cool temperatures. A quirky feature found in a few port cities, spice chimneys, narrow flues not for smoke, but to help waft away overwhelming aromas that might otherwise spoil the more delicate goods. Historians still debate whether these structures were designed first for utility or for show. Were they practical storage spaces or monuments to a city's importance in the global web of trade? Markets and auction halls were equally important. Imagine the spice auctions of Amsterdam, where bidders sat in hushed anticipation, competing for shipments still warm from the tropics. Deals were struck with subtle gestures, coded phrases, and sometimes even in complete silence. Even private homes were built with spice closets or spice kitchens, small, windowless spaces where valuable blends were kept safe from humidity and theft. So next time you enter a storeroom or open your own kitchen cabinet, imagine it as part of a grand tradition of architecture shaped not by bricks alone, but by scent, secrecy, and the value of a well-preserved pod of cardamom. As your journey presses on, you now find yourself amid the rituals and routines of spice blending, a craft passed from hand to hand, from generation to generation, filled with memory, intuition, and the occasional splash of superstition. Picture grandmothers and herbalists hunched over grinding stones, the soft scrape of pestle against mortar mingling with the scent of roasting seeds. Every region along the silk routes had its own signature blends. Garam masala in northern India, Ras el Hanout in Morocco, five spice powder in China, Baharat in the Levant. Each one a story in powder form, shaped by landscape, trade, and taste. A quirky tradition. In some households, the exact proportions of a spice blend were never written down, only taught orally, often through rhyme or rhythm. 2 shakes of clove, 1 of black. A grandmother might murmur, her hand knowing more than any recipe could say. Historians still argue whether these blends evolved through culinary trial and error or were inherited from ancient medicinal practices, making the line between food and remedy beautifully blurred. Blending spices was often a communal act, especially before big festivals or weddings. Imagine neighbors sitting together, toasting and grinding, gossiping and laughing, the air shimmering with scent and anticipation. And blending wasn't just culinary, it was philosophical. A balance of hot and cold elements. A harmony of bitter, sweet, pungent, and earthy. It mirrored the seasons, the humors of the body, the mood of the home. So, next time you stir a spice blend into a pot of soup or stew, think of it as an old language, a conversation not just between ingredients, but across time, family, and forgotten kitchens. As your journey deepens, you now encounter the role of spices in healing not just the body but the mind and spirit. Beyond their place in food and medicine, spices were often used in rituals designed to soothe, center, and protect. Picture quiet rooms filled with wafting incense, soft chants, and the comfort of scent wrapping around the soul like a warm blanket. Ancient healers believed that certain spices calmed the heart, lifted sadness, or chased away nightmares. Cloves for grief, cardamom for clarity, myrrh for memory. These beliefs weren't just symbolic, they were sensorial experiences, offering comfort in times of distress. A quirky remedy from medieval Europe involved tying small bags of nutmeg, lavender, and cinnamon to a person's bedposts to promote good dreams. In ancient China, spice satchels were worn around the neck during festival seasons to ward off illness and bring harmony. Historians still debate whether these were medical practices or spiritual tools or both. Spices were also used in funerary rites across the world. In Egypt, they were part of the embalming process. In India and Indonesia, they were scattered on funeral pyres. These rituals linked spices to endings but also to continuations, memory, and reverence. Imagine a quiet space where someone lights a clove-scented candle and takes a deep breath after a long, hard day. That small act echoes millennia of human yearning for peace, balance, and comfort through scent. So, the next time you feel calmed by a warm cup of ginger tea or restored by the scent of cinnamon in the air, remember, you're sharing in a timeless practice, one where spice has always been more than flavor, it's been therapy for the senses and balm for the soul. As your spice-scented journey continues, you now enter the world of education and apprenticeship, how the knowledge of spices was passed from generation to generation, often outside of formal schools. Picture apprentices kneeling beside master traders, cooks, or healers, learning not from books but from repetition, aroma, and trust. In medieval spice guilds, young traders studied the weight, feel, and smell of each spice with almost sacred attention. They memorized where each came from, what it cured, and how to spot a fake. Imagine an apprentice being quizzed by candlelight, which is real cinnamon, and which is cassia. Smell again closer. Many of these apprenticeships lasted years, with little written documentation. A quirky detail: some guilds required apprentices to identify dozens of spices blindfolded by scent alone, like a sommelier testing wine. Historians still argue whether this system created regional experts or restricted broader trade access by keeping knowledge secret. In kitchens, too, spice learning was hands-on. A young girl might spend years beside her mother or grandmother, memorizing the proper order for toasting, grinding, and combining spices. There were no written recipes, just memory, smell, and instinct. A misplaced pinch could ruin an entire dish. Or worse, be interpreted as an insult during a celebration. Even in healing practices, apprentice herbalists learned to mix spice remedies by touch and smell, guided by whispered tradition. These moments of quiet repetition were how knowledge endured long before formal institutions existed. So, the next time you instinctively know how much spice to add to your meal or recognize a scent from childhood, you're experiencing the long echo of these ancient, aromatic classrooms where learning lived in the nose, the hand, and the heart. Your journey now arrives at the intersection of spice and superstition, where belief, magic, and ritual stirred together with every pinch. Imagine ancient homes and marketplaces where the line between seasoning and spellcasting was almost invisible, where a handful of spice could bless a birth, curse a rival, or protect a house. Spices often appeared in charms and rituals designed to bring luck or drive away misfortune. In some African traditions, dried cloves and cinnamon sticks were worn as amulets to attract prosperity. In Europe, nutmeg was grated into wine and sipped before journeys to ensure safe passage. In India, turmeric wasn't just a kitchen staple, it was a purifier, a ward against evil, and a blessing in marriage rites. A quirky practice in 17th century England involved burying a pouch of pepper and mustard seed beneath a threshold to stop arguments in the home. Did it work? Who knows, but it certainly left a fragrant mystery under the floorboards. Historians still debate whether these practices were more about hope or habit, but the power people placed in scent is undeniable. In folk medicine, the same spice used in a stew might also be boiled into a bath to banish melancholy or steeped in oil to draw out bad spirits. The belief wasn't just in the spice, but in the ritual, the act of preparing and applying it with intention. Some of these traditions survive today in subtle ways. The cinnamon candle you light to welcome guests, the clove you tuck into a festive orange, the turmeric paste smeared on a bride's skin. These aren't just decorative. They're echoes. So, as you cook, sip, or scent your space, you're not just engaging with taste, you're partaking in ancient acts of belief, where spice is both flavor and force, ritual and remembrance. Now, your journey leads you to the unglamorous yet essential world of spice fraud and imitation, a shadowy subplot of the global spice story. For as long as people valued spices, there were those eager to stretch them, dilute them, or mimic them for profit. Picture spice stalls where buyers sniff cautiously, wondering if that rich golden powder is real saffron or dyed threads of marigold. Saffron, one of the most expensive spices in history, has long been a favorite target for fraud. Merchants would sometimes color corn silk or shredded bark to mimic its deep red hue. In medieval Germany, there was even a law called the Saffranschuh*, which punished saffron adulteration with execution. Yes, spice fraud was a capital crime. That's how serious it got. A quirky trick? Some dishonest pepper sellers would coat pebbles in resin and roll them in black powder to resemble dried peppercorns. Imagine biting into one of those by mistake, an unpleasant surprise, and a chipped tooth. Historians still debate how widespread spice fraud truly was. Some claim it plagued nearly every major market. Others argue it was more feared than actually common. Regardless, the anxiety it caused led to strict regulations, guild certifications, and even public spice inspectors in some cities. To combat fraud, experienced buyers developed keen senses. They'd rub a spice between fingers, watch how it stained cloth, or judge freshness by aroma. In kitchens and apothecaries alike, knowledge was protection. So, next time you open a jar of turmeric or marvel at a pinch of saffron, remember the long history of trust and deception that traveled with it. Because behind every sweet or spicy note lies the quiet triumph of authenticity over imitation. As you travel deeper into the sensory world of spices, your path now crosses the evolving role of spices in modern science, particularly in nutrition, pharmacology, and biochemistry. Picture sleek laboratories where researchers in white coats analyze compounds in turmeric and ginger, seeking ancient wisdom in molecular form. Many spices once valued solely for taste or tradition are now studied for their potential health benefits. Curcumin, found in turmeric, has gained global attention for its anti-inflammatory properties. Capsaicin in chili peppers is researched for pain relief. Even humble cinnamon has been examined for its effect on blood sugar levels. A quirky discovery. In some early trials, the scent of black pepper was shown to improve alertness and memory recall, offering a modern scientific twist to ancient beliefs about mental clarity. Historians and medical researchers still debate how far we should lean on historical uses of spices when developing modern drugs, but the overlap is compelling. The spice trade has also sparked renewed interest in biodiversity and sustainable agriculture. Scientists now work with farmers to cultivate rare spice species that were once thought extinct or endangered. Some initiatives use satellite mapping to track spice growing regions, ensuring ethical sourcing and supporting indigenous knowledge. Meanwhile, chefs and dietitians collaborate with scientists to craft spice-rich diets that bridge cultural heritage and modern health. Imagine a kitchen where each ingredient is measured not just in taste, but in bioactivity, where spices are celebrated as medicine, memory, and meal. So next time you read a label or sip a spice-infused smoothie, remember, you're at the crossroads of tradition and innovation, where the ancient world of spice continues to shape the future of human health and understanding. Now, your steps carry you into the bustling world of modern spice tourism, a fragrant revival of curiosity that draws travelers from across the globe to the lands where spices were born. Picture sun-dappled hillsides in Kerala, India, or the clove orchards of Zanzibar, where visitors walk between rows of plants that shaped empires. Spice farms, once remote and utilitarian, have become living museums of botanical heritage. Guides crush leaves in their palms for guests to smell, offer warm cardamom tea on shaded porches, and explain how each spice grows, is harvested, and reaches kitchens around the world. You don't just learn, you breathe it in. A quirky touch? Some spice tours invite guests to grind their own masala using traditional mortars and pestles. Tourists carry home not just bags of spice but sensory memories: the sting of black pepper on the nose, the lemony freshness of crushed coriander, the sweetness of drying vanilla. Historians and anthropologists still discuss the role of these tours in cultural preservation versus commercialization. Do they help sustain ancient practices or turn them into performance? The answer, as always, is complex. What's clear is that spice tourism reconnects people with land, labor, and lineage. It shifts focus from the polished jar on a supermarket shelf to the soil it came from, the hands that tended it, and the weather it depended on. So, whether you wander through a cardamom grove or simply watch a travel documentary with a cup of chai in hand, know that you're participating in a modern ritual, one that honors the long, fragrant arc of spice history still unfolding. As your journey winds on, you now arrive at the intersection of spices and migration, how people carried their flavors with them across borders, oceans, and generations. Picture a grandmother stepping off a ship or crossing a dusty border, clutching not money, not clothes, but a pouch of spices sewn into her coat lining. Forced or voluntary, migration has always been accompanied by memory and food. Spices are anchors to identity. For displaced people, a familiar scent from a pan of sizzling cumin or ginger offers comfort and belonging when everything else feels foreign. A quirky image. In 19th-century immigrant communities in New York and London, spice traders would send handwritten newsletters with recipes to help recent arrivals recreate dishes from home. These weren't just instructions, they were lifelines. Historians still debate whether migration diluted traditional spice usage or enhanced it. Some believe diasporas softened recipes to accommodate new ingredients and palates. Others argue they created entirely new cuisines like Caribbean curry, Ethiopian Berber tacos in Los Angeles, or Indo-Chinese food in Nairobi that fused flavor and story. In kitchens all over the world today, you'll find spice tins that reflect dual identities: turmeric next to thyme, za'atar beside oregano, preserved lemon near barbecue rub. These drawers and racks are quiet diaries of cultural journeying. So next time you reach for a blend that feels oddly specific to your family, your neighborhood, or your own story, know it's more than seasoning. It's a passport, a timeline, a whispered line of heritage passed on in the language of scent. Your journey now brings you to the digital age, where the ancient world of spices finds new life in pixels, videos, and global clicks. Imagine a screen lighting up with a recipe tutorial that begins with cumin sizzling in oil, the camera leaning in close enough for you to almost smell it. Social media has transformed how spices are shared, discovered, and celebrated. On platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, home cooks from every corner of the globe post spice-forward dishes, reviving forgotten family recipes or remixing them into something entirely new. A quirky phenomenon? Spice ASMR videos, where creators whisper through the sounds of pepper cracking, cloves being ground, or cinnamon being stirred into warm milk. These calming clips gather millions of views, offering virtual comfort through sensory memory. Historians and digital anthropologists now study these posts as modern expressions of heritage, identity, and diaspora. They ask, are these uploads education, entertainment, or ritual? Perhaps they are all three: micro-performances of belonging, scented through the screen. Online shops and spice subscription boxes have also democratized access. Spices that once took years and empires to reach distant markets now arrive in days, complete with sourcing stories and recipe cards. Even the language around spices has shifted online. Terms like masala, Berber, and za'atar have become part of global vocabulary, tweeted and shared across continents like old world magic spelled out in hashtags. So, the next time you double tap a cinnamon roll reel or scroll through a turmeric latte recipe, know that you're part of a new silk route, a digital one. The same scents, the same seeds, just traveling now through fiber optic lines instead of camel trains. Your journey now drifts into the poetic and philosophical, how spices have served as metaphors for life itself. Across time and cultures, people have used spices to describe emotions, relationships, and the essence of experience. Picture a poet scribbling by lantern light, comparing love to saffron, rare, warm, and golden, just enough to transform everything. Spices were never just ingredients, they were symbols. In medieval love poems, cloves might represent longing, while black pepper hinted at jealousy or temptation. In Sufi mysticism, cardamom and rose were often invoked in metaphors for divine love and the inner sweetness of the soul. A quirky literary note: Shakespeare himself referenced saffron, ginger, and mace in his plays, not only to reflect the setting but to add texture to a character's mood or social standing. Historians still debate whether these references were meant to impress, to amuse, or simply to season the language itself. Philosophers, too, use spices in their analogies. Ancient Chinese thinkers spoke of life's balance in terms of taste: sweet, bitter, salty, spicy. Harmony, they believed, came not from eliminating extremes but blending them wisely like the perfect spice mix. Even today, we speak of a spicy relationship, a peppery attitude, or someone being the salt of the earth. These expressions show that flavor still shapes how we describe ourselves and others, because a bland life is no life at all. So the next time you use a pinch of something to brighten your food or your words, remember you're drawing from a long tradition where the spice of life has always meant more than taste. It has meant poetry, passion, and the vivid contrast that makes the journey worth savoring. As you continue onward, the horizon opens into the realm of climate and the changing fate of spice-growing regions. Imagine a field of cardamom in southern India, once thriving in cool, misty air, now wilting beneath rising temperatures. The scent of the future, it seems, is shifting. Climate change is already affecting spice agriculture in significant ways. Shifts in rainfall patterns, increased heat, and unpredictable storms have reduced yields and altered growing seasons. Black pepper vines are less productive in places they once thrived. Saffron crocuses in Kashmir bloom erratically. Vanilla orchids struggle with newer diseases. A quirky twist? Some farmers are experimenting with growing traditional spices in unexpected places like saffron in Switzerland or ginger in Canada, thanks to changing climates. It's a global game of adaptation, blending necessity with innovation. Historians, economists, and climate scientists still debate how long traditional spice landscapes can endure. Will Zanzibar still be the island of cloves in 50 years? Or will climate refugees carry clove seedlings into entirely new territories? The cultural implications are enormous. Spices are more than crops, they are identity, tradition, livelihood. When a spice farm closes due to drought, a family doesn't just lose income, they lose the rituals and rhythms that have shaped their lives for generations. And yet, in the face of adversity, communities are resisting loss. Cooperative farming, permaculture, and sustainable irrigation methods are bringing new hope to ancestral lands. Spices, like the people who grow them, have always adapted. So next time you add a dash of spice, pause for a moment. Somewhere in the world, someone is trying to keep that flavor alive, not just for your taste buds, but for their heritage, their soil, and their children's future. Now you arrive at a rarely seen corner of the spice world, the role of children in spice traditions, both in the past and today. Picture a small child trailing behind a parent in a spice field, mimicking their motions, learning not from words but from watching and smelling and doing. In many spice-producing regions, children have long been involved in the early steps of harvesting and sorting. Picking saffron threads, for instance, requires nimble fingers and careful eyes. In Zanzibar, cloves are collected by hand, often in family groups, work that's rhythmic, quiet, and deeply communal. A quirky detail: in some families, children were tasked with naming the spice jars in their kitchens, or composing rhymes to remember blend proportions. These playful customs turned the home into a living classroom where spice knowledge passed invisibly through generations. Historians still debate how to reconcile these stories of childhood learning with the darker reality of child labor. In many regions, economic hardship means children are still involved in long hours of spice production under difficult conditions. It's a painful contrast to the romanticized image of the spice child, and one that requires honest attention. But in many cases, families are finding new ways to engage their children in heritage without exploitation. Through storytelling, festivals, cooking traditions, and small backyard plots, children learn the meaning of spice as culture and connection, not just as work. So, the next time a child helps stir a pot or tastes a clove for the first time and crinkles their nose, know that something ancient is passing forward. A quiet inheritance, scented with cinnamon and care, that began in the fields and continues in kitchens. As your journey deepens into the warm, aromatic folds of time, you find yourself surrounded by the musical echoes of spice, yes, music. For as long as spices have moved through ports and palaces, they've inspired songs, dances, and instruments that carry their own rhythm and spice-soaked soul. In many cultures, spice harvest seasons are accompanied by music. In Kerala's Cardamom Hills, workers sing rhythmic tunes while picking, the melodies helping to pace the labor. In Zanzibar, clove pickers hum call and response songs, simple, melodic, scented with resilience and pride. A quirky tradition: In parts of Java, spice boats returning from distant voyages were greeted not just with bells or drums, but entire gamelan ensembles. These musical greetings were both celebration and ritual, welcoming wealth, yes, but also the sailor's safe return. Historians and ethnomusicologists still debate the extent to which spice migration influenced musical fusion, but the connections are clear. Percussion patterns from the Middle East influenced flamenco. Rhythms from East Africa traveled to Brazil and the Caribbean alongside nutmeg, cloves, and black pepper. Even lyrics tell stories of spice. Folk songs from Yemen and Morocco speak of cinnamon-scented lovers. In Indian devotional music, turmeric is sung about as divine radiance. In Caribbean calypso, fiery ginger and pepper make their way into playful, sensual verses. Modern musicians continue the tradition. You'll find entire albums themed around spice and scent, using sound to evoke memory because sometimes, a single chord can feel like the first bite of something rich and unforgettable. So, next time you stir your pot to a tune or find yourself humming while adding a pinch of something warm, remember, spices have a beat too. One that moves through fields and kitchens and hearts, syncopated, soulful, and timeless. As you continue through this aromatic odyssey, you step into the realm of gender and spice, a space where roles, rituals, and recognition have long simmered beneath the surface. Picture kitchens ruled by matriarchs, spice gardens tended by women, and trade routes once thought to be male-only, quietly shaped by female hands. In many cultures, it is women who hold the ancestral knowledge of spice blends. Grandmothers in North Africa measure Ras El Hanout by feel. In South India, daughters inherit the family's samba powder recipe like a sacred text. These formulas are rarely written, just smelled, tasted, and memorized. A quirky story from 19th century Turkey tells of women who would test the worthiness of potential daughters-in-law by how well they could roast and grind spices without burning them. The test was silent. No instruction. Just the sound of the mortar and the scent of spice rising or not. Historians still debate the visibility of women in the formal spice trade. While merchant records and ship logs largely feature men, new research reveals networks of female market traders, garden keepers, and community healers whose contributions were vital to spice economies, even if unrecorded. In healing, too, women were often the herbalists and spice-based remedy makers. Their mixtures were born not from medical schools, but from lived experience, ritual, and care. Spiced balms passed from midwife to mother to daughter. Even today, in global kitchens and spice cooperatives, women drive the cultivation, curation, and continuation of spice heritage. Their work is often unpaid, unnoticed, but it is everywhere. So when you next taste something lovingly seasoned, remember, many of the world's greatest flavors were carried not by ships, but by mothers' hands and whispered from one woman to another across the slow fire of time. As your journey unfolds further, you now arrive at the sensory crossroads, how spices heighten not only taste, but sight, sound, smell, and even memory. Spices don't just flavor food, they flavor time, place, and experience. One whiff of cumin, and you might find yourself back in your grandmother's kitchen, back before you even knew the names of the spices you were tasting. Our sense of smell is deeply tied to memory, and spices are among the most potent scent triggers in existence. Scientists call it the Proustian effect, named after the writer whose childhood memories were triggered by a Madeleine cake dipped in tea. For many, it's not cake, but cinnamon. Or cloves. Or ginger, warming the air in mid-December. A quirky fact? Research suggests that scent memories, especially those involving spices, are stored in the brain with unusual vividness. A hint of cardamom can unlock memories not recalled for decades. Historians still debate whether ancient societies understood this sensory mnemonic link consciously, or whether they simply followed the nose to where meaning lived. Spices also influence color. Saffron infuses food with a rich golden hue. Paprika burns red like embers. Turmeric stains fingertips with the color of sunlight. In a way, spice is visual language, too, a silent statement on the plate or in the bowl. Even sound is affected. The sizzle of mustard seeds in hot oil is a signal in Indian kitchens, a moment of transformation that tells the cook, now. Now add the garlic. Now start the dance. So when you next encounter spice, whether by scent, by taste, by sound, or by memory, know that it is not just a culinary act, but a sensory one. A tapestry of inputs that awakens not just your tongue, but the deepest corners of who you are. As your journey meanders on, you come to the fascinating relationship between spices and fashion, how the fragrant and colorful world of spices subtly influenced clothing, dyes, and even cosmetics. Picture a royal court where the air is heavy with the scent of exotic spices, and garments gleam with colors drawn from spice-derived dyes. Many spices serve double duty as natural dyes. Saffron, for example, was prized not only for its flavor but also for the vibrant yellow it imparted to fabrics, making it a symbol of wealth and status. Imagine flowing robes dyed a rich golden hue, worn by priests or nobility, the color signaling both piety and prestige. Turmeric and annatto also played significant roles in coloring textiles across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. These spice-based dyes were prized for their brightness and relative permanence, often used in ceremonial garments. A quirky fact: in some cultures, powdered spices were mixed with oils or pastes to create temporary skin adornments akin to makeup or tattoos. These fragrant markings might be worn during festivals or rites of passage, blending scent with symbolism. Historians still debate how much these dyeing practices influence trade demand for specific spices versus their culinary and medicinal uses. But it's clear that spices contributed richly to the visual culture of many societies. Imagine walking through a marketplace where spice stalls stand beside textile vendors, the colors and scents mingling to create a feast for the senses. So, the next time you admire a golden sari or a brightly dyed garment, consider the centuries of spice-infused artistry woven into its threads. Your journey now brings you to the fascinating intersection of spices and literature, how these aromatic treasures have inspired storytelling, poetry, and prose across cultures and centuries. Imagine scribes in ancient courts penning verses about the elusive cinnamon tree, or travelers recounting adventures sparked by the quest for rare spices. In classical Persian poetry, spices symbolize love's intoxicating allure, mingling the senses in rich metaphor. Imagine a verse where cloves and musk dance together in the scent of a beloved's perfume, evoking desire and devotion. A quirky detail: in medieval European almanacs, spices were sometimes depicted alongside celestial bodies, believed to influence human temperament and fate. Historians still debate whether these associations shaped spice trade priorities or merely reflected popular belief. Literary works also use spices to denote exoticism and otherness. Shakespeare's plays mention ginger and cinnamon to evoke far-off lands, sparking curiosity and wonder among audiences. Spices continue to inspire modern writers, who use them to evoke atmosphere, culture, and emotion, turning scent into story, flavor into feeling. So when you read a novel or poem scented with spice imagery, remember you're entering a long tradition where these small treasures carry big meanings, connecting words, worlds, and hearts. As your journey winds toward its next fragrant chapter, you enter the domain of spice preservation in art and museum collections. Imagine walking through halls where centuries-old spice jars, merchant ledgers, and trade maps are displayed like treasures, each artifact whispering stories of distant lands and daring journeys. Museums around the world now collect and exhibit spice-related objects, vessels from ancient Alexandria, Venetian spice chests, even preserved spice blends. These collections help historians reconstruct trade routes, understand cultural exchanges, and reveal the everyday lives of people who valued these scents and flavors. A quirky fact: some spice jars were designed with secret compartments to hide precious contents from thieves, reflecting the high stakes of the spice trade. Historians debate how often these compartments were actually used, but their existence adds mystery and intrigue to museum displays. Exhibitions often include sensory elements, inviting visitors to smell recreated spice blends or hear recordings of markets bustling with the calls of traders. These immersive experiences bring the history of spices to life, engaging multiple senses. Through these collections, spices transcend their materiality to become symbols of connection, exploration, and cultural heritage, reminding us that even the smallest seeds can carry the weight of history. So next time you visit a museum, seek out the spice exhibits. They are fragrant portals to the rich tapestry of human adventure and taste. Your journey now reaches a reflective pause, considering the enduring legacy of the Silk Route spices in a world that's ever-changing yet deeply connected by these ancient aromas. Picture the spices on your shelf, humble and familiar, yet loaded with stories that span continents and centuries. From the first bark stripped in tropical forests to the bustling markets of today, spices have woven themselves into the fabric of culture, cuisine, medicine, and commerce. They have inspired exploration, sparked conflict, and nurtured communities. A quirky thought: despite all our technological advancements, the simple pleasure of grinding pepper or adding cinnamon to a dish remains an intimate, sensory experience, a moment when history touches the present in the most direct way. Historians still argue about many aspects of the spice trade: the exact roots, the full impact, the untold stories, but what is undeniable is the power of these small seeds and barks to connect humanity. So, as you sit back and savor the flavors and scents that spice your life, know that you're part of a grand continuum. The silk routes are not just ancient paths but living legacies threaded through your kitchen, your culture, and your senses. Thank you for joining this extended journey. May your dreams be fragrant and your nights peaceful.